Okay, so looks like we're online now. First, welcome to this very first session of our Google Hangout live on air. You'll be able to watch this video again on YouTube after it finishes. And here I'm Vincent Chauvet introducing you to the participants in these Google Hangouts, starting with Alberto Alemanno. Alberto, can you hear us?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm very happy to meet you.
And we also have today, you've met them probably already on the forum and also on Twitter and on our Facebook group, to which you can ask questions. On Twitter, the hashtag is, as always, Understanding Europe. So here we have Ferdinando Orlando.
Hi.
Hi, Ferdinando.
Hi, and welcome.
And we have also Alban Colin from France, who's also a community TA here on Coursera for this second session. How are you, Alban?
Fine, thanks. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Hangout.
And I'm Vincent Chauvet. You met me also in the first session of the MOOC, Understanding Europe, Why It Matters, and What It Can Offer You. So, Alberto, to you, can you tell us a little bit how this second session is going, and make a quick introduction to this Hangout before we go directly to the very numerous questions we are receiving from the participants. Alberto.
Yes. Welcome to everyone. I am extremely excited to meet you all live for the first time. We have been spending a lot of time together over the last few weeks. Most of the videos you watch have been recorded over the last few weeks. so they might sound or at least look a bit different than the current feeling of being connected live. The objective of this Google Hangout is to get to know each other and to have the possibility to contextualize the main learnings of our MOOC Understanding Europe with the present realities of Europe. So inevitably, we expect today's MOOC to be somehow monopolized by the recent result that came out of the European Parliament elections. But at the same time, we also would like to seize this opportunity to provide you some feedback on how our MOOC has been unfolding over the last 3 weeks. We are overall extremely happy about the fact that so many participants are engaging with our videos, with our contents. We're happy about how many of you are contributing to the forum, to the different threads that are being created by you, and by the fact that our teaching assistants have been also providing a moderated forum in which you can exchange your ideas. I already see that there are a lot of questions coming on the chat, and I will probably pick some of these questions during the next few minutes. In the meantime, I would like to ask Vincent, who is moderating this chat together with Ferdinando and Alban, whether I have forgot something before moving on to my own analysis of what is going on in Europe today.
No, thank you, Alberto. Was perfect, and indeed, people are waiting, and most of the questions coming in now are about the recent events in Europe, and especially the European elections and its aftermath. So here to you, a lot of questions and concerns to answer from MOOC participants on this election and what's actually going on now in the European Union.
Yes, I will therefore make a brief, perhaps, analysis of what the results of this European Parliament election suggest, at least from our own educational purpose. As you might remember, the slogan portraying the European elections was that this time is different, act, react, impact. This slogan aimed mainly at increasing the turnout at the European elections, which, as you know very well, has been constantly decreasing from 1979, the year of the first direct election to the European Parliament, to the last one in 1999, where we went down to around 43% turnout. Well, as you might know, the turnout in the present elections, the one that just closed, was very similar, just a few digit points, I think 0.3% difference, and notably an increase. So there's been a formal confirmation. This is overall a pretty disappointing result because, as the European campaign suggested, this time should have been different. Well, the conditions for having a different elections were all met. The action could have actually took place in terms of higher turnout. The reaction could have been important in terms of European political leaders listening to the results of these elections. And finally, in terms of impact, this is probably too early to say. So let me tell you in brief that the overall action has been limited. Less than one European citizen out of two casted a ballot. This is the 43% turnout I mentioned. The reaction has been also conventional because the elections have been perceived, have been narrated as a referendum on the current national governments. So there's very little new under the sun. As for the impact, certainly all the media have been focusing on the fact that for the first time ever, around a quarter of the newly elected parliament is represented by elected who have an anti-European or an anti-establishment agenda. This is certainly a novelty that, however, should not be overemphasized, as the media are doing, because despite the great numbers, these groups, due to their multifarious nature and net internal divisions, they are very different and coming from the extreme left and extreme right, they are very unlikely to make a difference in terms of decision-making and balance of power within the current parliament. The European political leaders seems, despite this incredible failure of these elections, to suggest that everything is under control and basically suggest that it is business as usual. Indeed, notwithstanding the protest vote, the European Parliament seems to remain in the hands of the established political families, which do represent around, I would say, 588, according to some counts, 561 out of 751 MEPs who will be generally supported of the European project. So what's next? What kind of consequences we can expect from the new parliaments? Well, as you might know, the big and the first stress test for the new parliament will be the role the parliament will play in the designation and selection of the new commission president. Here, it might be important to provide you some feedback in order to make sure you will fully understand what is going on during these hours. In order to galvanize the European electorate, the idea that many political leaders decided to develop has been to link for the first time the vote of the individual European citizens that express and cast their ballot at the national level to the choice of the lead candidate for the post of Commission President. This has been the first effort ever to show European citizens that their vote actually could make a difference at the European level by designating the Commission President and therefore also politicizing the Commission Cabinet, the future Commission Cabinet. However, the Parliament interpretation of this specific mechanism, which is foreseen in Article 17, paragraph 7 of the Treaty of the European Union, has been particularly, let's say, happy or enthusiastic. In other words, the political leaders who have accepted to develop this process that has been quickly defined Spitzenkandidat in German, which means lead candidate, the head of the list is going to be appointed as the new president of the European Commission, has not been, let's say, interpreted in the same way by the political leaders sitting in the European Council. So what is actually going on in Europe is the following, that yesterday, for the first time, the new, the political leaders decided to meet in order to take stock of the results of the election, and they have decided to entrust the Jean-Claude Juncker, the former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, to lead the negotiations that should have designate the new majority within the new parliament, and therefore the possible election of Mr. Juncker himself as the next president of the European Commission. So overall, it seems that all political families have decided, at least the established one, to entrust Mr. Juncker with such an exploratory task. Unfortunately, from a citizen's perspective, yesterday evening, the European Council decided to meet over dinner, an informal dinner, and the main result of this intergovernmental gathering has been to actually entrust with such an exploratory mandate a different person than Mr. Juncker. It is the president of the European Council, Mr. Van Rompuy, who has received such a mandate. You can therefore assist to a clear tension between the European Parliament interpretation of Article 17 and the interpretation given by the main European leaders who gathered informally within the European Council. They decided to follow a different path. That's where we stand today. There are a lot of speculations. There are a lot of people who are crunching their numbers and trying to see which could be the next majority from the parliament perspective. But many other commentators suggest that the Spitzenkandidat process is already dead in the very moment in which the European Council yesterday decided not to entrust this specific mandate and not to designate Mr. Juncker as the new president of the European Commission. So that's where we are. We probably stand in a sort of limbo. It is extremely difficult to predict what's next, but it's absolutely fascinating for you who are studying and engaging with the materials in our course to see how the European Union develops and how it will certainly come up differently from this process. So if I have to sum up in one slogan, what happened in these elections is that this time was not necessarily different as originally announced by the EU itself, but probably the next time, or at least the next few months and days, will look different. Will certainly look different because the way in which both the European Parliament and the political leaders are acting, it is certainly new. It is new in the process and is also new in terms of substantive impact that the vote of us as citizens, or at least those of us who had the possibility to cast their ballots, will have in the European Parliament and in the next political leadership will be quite significant. So let me stop here with this brief introduction to and brief comment on the results of the European election, and let me turn back to Vincent and to Alban and Ferdinando.
Thank you, Alberto. And yes, let's turn to Ferdinando, who's been receiving questions. I remind you that you can ask questions on Twitter, #UnderstandingEurope, and on Facebook. And he's been receiving questions on what is basically the subject of our essay, the essay we propose you in this course, about participation and also national results differing from state to state. So Ferdinando, the floor is yours to sum up and ask your question to Alberto.
Yes, thank you, Alberto, and thank you, Vincent. As you know, I am the responsible about the forum, about the subsection forum about EU legal order and European Parliament election. And we received so many questions about these European election and the European Parliament also. If I have to sum up the questions, the main subject was how is possible that German election, for instance, the German rate of participation in election, in European election, is the opposite about the USA, the United States, the United States rates on Britain's rates, and also how is it possible? Maybe Alberto is better for me, is better than me for in order to reply this. How it's possible that some parties, Eurosceptic party like UKIP in Great Britain or Front National in France, could take this power, this enormous power, in this election.
Thank you,
Alberto?
Ferdinando, for these questions. Yes, thanks a lot for asking these questions. That is certainly central to the reading of the current elections. Let me start by drawing your attention on the actual number. Behind the aggregate level, so the average turnout of 43%, or the individual high scores by anti-system parties, there is an important diversity that we don't have to forget. It is important for anyone who would like to analyze the result of these elections to highlight the fact that the European elections are not organized on the very same day independently from municipal and local elections, but rather the opposite. They are organized in different dates in Europe. So we know that the elections took place between last Thursday and last Sunday. That the elections have been organized at the national level, what has reflected inevitably the national political discourse, and also the fact that inevitably this important political diversity gave rise to different realities. The turnout in countries like Belgium or Luxembourg, where voting is actually mandatory, has been extremely high. But this certainly creates a distortion in our reading of the 33% turnout. I'm giving you just as an example. Coming to the so-called anti-establishment parties, the parties who certainly won the most in terms of at the aggregate level from the previous elections, well, also here we have to be extremely cautious in discussing about or defining this big win as an earthquake, as many people have done. Many observers seem to suggest and to convey the wrong impression that at the European level these groups will make the difference by creating, for instance, a new political group. It seems, and it is very likely, that these different forces, which have very different nature, very different agenda, as I said, some coming from the left, some coming from the right, extreme left and extreme right, they pursue different objectives, and therefore will be very unlikely that they will belong to the same family. We cannot confront the political agenda followed by the Portuguese left bloc or Podemos and Syriza in Greece, with that pursued by the Front National in France, or the one by UKIP or the Danish People's Party. Here we are talking about very different realities that certainly became important at the national level, but paradoxically, and this is an interesting paradox, these groups now have gained an important political capital that has been gathered at the national level, but it won't be represented at the national level, will only be reflected at the European level, where it will basically be diluted by the mainstream political parties. So it is important to be extremely cautious when understanding the realities of the current anti-establishment parties within the European Parliament. They seem extremely powerful at the national level, because that's where they come from. But once they are represented within the European Parliament, their power seems to be extremely less important. And there's even the likelihood that they will give rise to a further polarization within the European Parliament, thus, once more, paradoxically giving more power to the established political families, who will have now a real incentive to work together in order not to be caught within the obstructionist measures that these new parties within the parliament are expected to develop.
Thank you, Alberto. And regarding Euroscepticism, Alban has some question whether people really did vote on European issues and whether they were able to understand what was at stake. So, Alban, can you tell us what people have been asking about this on the forums, Twitter, Facebook, and here on YouTube? Alban, we cannot hear you, I guess.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah, no, yeah, we hear you now. So your questions.
Okay, so thanks, Vincent, for the talks, and thanks, Alberto, for the explanations. We had effectively a lot of questions and a lot of talks in the forum and here on YouTube in the Hangout about the information that people do not have to make their minds up about Europe. And they think that we don't have explanation in the media or at school or at the university. Some of them think that it should be mandatory to have some explanation or some information basically at school, and they just want to know what, Alberto, you think about that. What's your point of view?
Yes, Alban, it's very important to take this perspective, meaning trying to understand to what extent the average European citizen is well placed to take and to cast his ballot and to make a choice in Europe. In order to do so, we have to compare his position, his literacy at the national level. Can we really say that the average French citizen is better placed to vote in France than at the European level? Well, this is a difficult question. It depends really on which country we're focusing on, but the overall impression is that the average civic awareness existing at the national level, it is and tends to be higher than the civic awareness existing at the European level. In other words, people tend to be more familiar and to feel closer to the national political system than to the European political system. To what extent this result, which seems to be quite objective, would entitle us to say that at the end of the day, Europeans, or not all Europeans should express their voice in Europe? Well, I think this would be a slippery slope. I think that everyone in Europe should be entitled to express a vote, and even if many Europeans have expressed an anti-establishment, a protest vote against the European Union, their vote is as valuable as someone who has expressed a vote that has confirmed or that has been in favor of an established political family like the Popular Party or the Social Democrats. So we really have to pay attention not to fall victim of a sort of political correctness bias that would enable us to judge anyone who has not voted towards a European or a pro-integration agenda. In my view, all votes carry the same weight, and at the same time, the fact that today, within the new European Parliament that will be constituted in July, there will be more voices rather than less voices, it is actually a big win for the democratic nature of Europe. This shows how democratic the European Union is, and at the same time, it will force the established political families to address much of the discontent that these national political parties were capable to channel through their protest vote and to finally bring it on the table of the European Parliament. You see, this seems to be a positive side of the current results. Many forms of discontent in the past were not against the European Union, were not channeled within the institutional channel. They didn't have a significant or no representation at all within the European Parliament, but now they will be represented, and this will make them more responsible for the position they will carry. These people will become policymakers. They will have to take hard decisions, and they will have to shift their default mood, which is about complaining, into a more constructive stance in order to take decisions that might be favorable also to their own electorate.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. And I had a personal thought about it. Since we see that Eurosceptics were, for instance, high in France and in the UK in systems where at the national level they are underrepresented, can we foresee some improvement, whether it is at national level, putting some more proportionality in the votes, or at European level by having, for instance, transnational lists? We've had, maybe for the first time, transnational campaigns with what you said that Spitzenkandidaten were traveling around Europe, and notably also not in the UK. So what's the room for improvement, and how could the 2019 European elections be even more democratic, not meaning that we should have less Eurosceptics, but maybe go further in the process of the European political integration?
Thank you, Vincent, for your comments. I do believe that the room for improvement in terms of democratic improvement, enhancement of the political process in Europe is enormous. And that's probably the main lessons that we really should draw from these results. What happened now, it is a clear disconnect between the national vote and the European vote. And the Spitzenkandidat process, which, by the way, was not fully endorsed by the Political Leadership Bureau for a series of reasons we can investigate later, does not necessarily suggest that the European Union political system is currently capable to fill this gap. I do expect the new elected to actually develop in the future and during the next 5 years some of the solutions that you have suggested. taking the commitment to make their political engagement go beyond the borders, developing cross-border and transnational political families capable to present, according to a similar common agenda, different candidates in more than one country, and to go further than that by making sure that a European public sphere could be created by, for instance, devoting one single day for the European elections all across the European Union, and making sure that this day of election won't be overlapping with local or national elections. It is clearly the right time to think about how we can improve a European public sphere, because it is pretty intuitive that should the political parties at the national level had developed similar mechanisms in the past, probably the current protest vote would have not occurred to the same extent. The discontent would have been somehow addressed by the different political families at the European level instead of at the national level. And what seems to have become a national liability, like the Front National, it would have become perhaps a European issue, an issue that should be solved at the European political level. So there are a lot of mechanisms that can be developed, top-down and not only bottom-up, institutional mechanisms that could improve the democratic nature of the European political process.
Thank you, Alberto. And we've talked extensively about the inner of the European Union and internal policies, but we have also, I guess, Ferdinando, a lot of questions about the external action and the role of the EU abroad or towards its partners. And I guess you have questions about, first, Ukraine. Ukraine was also voting for the presidential elections on Sunday, and about TTIP, the transatlantic treaty negotiations that were also a big issue, at least in France and Germany, in this European campaign. So, Ferdinando, the floor is yours.
Yes. As you know, Alberto, our forum is full about questions and about doubts, about critics also, with the about the role, the external politics, and the external relation with between Europe and Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, and so on. But nowadays, Ukraine is very important for our forum. So, what is, in your opinion, the most criticism point about this situation, this very important situation? And we have also many questions about TTIP. This is a topic very important, a very hard topic in these days, because this subject is there's a sort of fog about this, and so our student wants to know more and more about who is responsible for this and what TTIP can produce for our life, for our European lives in our life day by day. And so this is the if I have to sum this, we have many people that send this question. So what's your reply?
Thank you, Ferdinando. It is actually true that we have collected a lot of questions on the external dimension of the European Union over the last few days, and there is a clear interest into the negotiations of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. So let me split the two questions by first providing you a general overview of the external action of the European Union, and then I will come and spend a few comments on TTIP. The European Union, it is a very unique creature when it comes to its internal functioning, and we have been highlighted the specificity of the institutional design of the EU. At the same time, the European Union is also a very hybrid creature when it comes to its external action. Why so? Because the European Union enjoys legal personality. It is actually capable to sign up international treaties and to take commitments at the external level, but at the same time is not entirely capable to do so in all policy areas. So it is extremely complex to fully understand the weight the European Union plays as an international actor. We are certainly familiar with the idea that when it comes to international trade, what we call commercial policy, the European Union is virtually capable to take any possible international commitment, like signing up for the WTO, the World Trade Organization, or now negotiating an international trade agreement with the US. But as soon as we come to the foreign policy, well, the situation is slightly different, because the European Union mode of functioning differs enormously. Basically, the European Union can act at the international level within the foreign policy fields only when a unanimity can be reached within the Council. That basically means that all European countries need to agree on a particular position, be that economic sanctions against Ukraine or or a position vis-à-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This certainly makes the European Union look extremely weak. We won't be defending the European Union on the international sphere when thinking about how fragmented and differentiated the position has been within the European Union in its reaction vis-à-vis the Ukraine situation. This context is extremely regretful for the European Union and for its citizens, but at the same time it finds its own roots into the lack of political integration within the European Union. Much of the resistance towards the development of a common sanction policy vis-à-vis Ukraine has to do with policies like the energy policy, where the European Union is not speaking with one voice, and where the economic interest of each individual state currently diverges. Therefore, only more Europe could, internal Europe, could give rise to more external Europe. Coming
on
to
this very...
Yes, Vincent.
Yeah. No, I'm letting you on TTIP just to say that we'll jump back to the euro and the crisis and the internal affairs just after that with a question from Alban, but now we're on TTIP now.
The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is the most ambitious international agreement ever negotiated at the worldwide level. It aims at establishing a free trade area between the United States and Europe, thus creating the largest market for trading products and services and also investments at the worldwide level. However, TTIP is currently questioned by civil society in quite severe terms, because if on the one side we have a bunch of economic studies suggesting that TTIP might actually deliver significant economic gains that could be passed to small and medium enterprises, and not only to nationals, but finally to the average consumer. On the other side, we have a lot of fear that the social costs stemming from this economic benefit of TTIP might be too important, and therefore would weaken the case for such an agreement. Well, this is a very interesting debate, certainly not an easy one, that should be debated not only at the economic level, but also at the, let's say, socio-economic level. Is it actually true that TTIP could lead to such an increase of social cost for society as a whole? Well, my own take, having been work a lot on the TTIP negotiations and having contributed to two policy reports, one for the European Parliament and one for the European Commission, is that there is a lot of misinformation revolving around the mechanism that is expected to deliver these gains within the TTIP. Let me briefly explain you which is the mechanism that will deliver the most important gains within TTIP. Well, as you might know, one of the main obstacles to the free movement of goods, but also services at the worldwide level, is represented by regulations. Regulations tend to differ from one region to another, from one country to another, and that basically translates into higher compliance costs for anyone who is interested to export his goods or services into another territory. Well, against this backdrop, the United States and the European Union are currently trying to see whether it is possible to make their different regulatory standards compatible one with another. What does it mean compatible? This is the most important point where a lot of misunderstandings exist. Compatibility means that each country will keep its own regulatory standards. That basically means that the United States will continue producing its own cars by following its car safety rules, and the European Union will do exactly the same. However, because of the compatibility objective, the idea of TTIP is to reach sectoral agreements for each particular area. It might be cars, in my example, but it could also be pharmaceutical or food, establishing an equivalence existing between the two standards. That basically means that if a US car is safe and it has been approved in America, well, the very same car should be accepted in the European territory. Vice versa, if a European car is compliant with the European standard, it should be automatically accepted by the US. I don't really see the functioning of this compatibility chapter in the agreement as a race to the bottom, what most of civil society seems to be scared about. The concern is that this possible compatibility exercise might lead and provide incentives to the other jurisdiction to lower their standards in order to compete economically. Well, this argument seems to be intuitive, but it doesn't seem to be supported by any evidence. I think that it would be extremely difficult for any politicians and policymaker to sell the idea to his own constituencies that TTIP will lower instead of increasing safety standards. Actually, the real incentives for any policymaker is to guarantee safety and to actually increase over time that safety rather than decreasing them. I therefore do not buy the argument according to which TTIP might lead to a deregulatory stance. The other concern linked to TTIP is and relates to the so-called state-investor dispute mechanism. Well, in any international trade agreement whose objective is also the investment, there is a habit to include a specific dedicated dispute settlement mechanism allowing the investors, let's say the US investors who have been investing significant amount of resources in the European Union, to lodge a complaint in front of arbitrators which have been created within the European Union and the United States in order to solve those disputes. Well, there is a clear concern that the creation of an alternative dispute settlement mechanism on top of the existing dispute settlement mechanism might create a sort of shortcut that might circumvent the functioning of both the political and the legal system, thus providing a comparative advantage to multinationals as compared to national governments. Also here, I have some doubts about the importance, the significance of these concerns. If we look at the data, only few disputes have been settled through this mechanism around the world, and at the same time, it is not sure that this investor-state dispute will be included in TTIP, and the best illustration of such an uncertainty on the European side is the fact that our trade commissioner decided to open a public consultation a couple of weeks ago, which is still running, allowing anyone in civil society to express its fear, its ideas about the opportunity to create such a mechanism. So the jury is still out when it comes to debating the pros and cons of a state investor dispute mechanism within TTIP, and more in general to the benefits and the cost of TTIP as an international agreement of new generation.
Thank you, Alberto. I think you have been answering a lot of questions coming in also during your speech from Katia Munoz about EU and the US and the concerns, and I refer also to the articles you've been writing about it, and you can find additional content in the additional contents tab on Coursera, where your writing is available, and on your blog, albertoalemanno.eu. So now let's turn to Alban and ask him what were his questions related to economy, the euro, and the crisis. Alban Colin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. We had different questions about European politics and especially European fiscal and monetary politics. And I will just ask you two things that were brought up by our fellow students, both on the forum and here on the Hangout. First, Jim D, who asked how much of the economic crisis would you contribute to unification of currency, the euro? And in the same way, from Eza Fernandez da Silva, is it possible to orchestrate a common monetary policy with multiple fiscal policies? Do you think that it's contradictory, and do you think it has a small or real or huge impact on the economic crisis, or do you think that it has no impact at all?
Well, both questions are very relevant and I think can be addressed together. When discussing about the level of economic integration in Europe, we often forget the so-called original sin of Europe, something that I will be discussing also throughout the MOOC. What I refer to when I talk about the original sin is the fact that European integration went probably too fast in Europe. When a decision was taken a few years before the Maastricht Treaty, but it was in Maastricht that such a decision was taken, to develop a monetary union which would have led to sharing the monetary sovereignty among Europe without necessarily backing up such a decision with a fully fledged economic and fiscal union. This has led to a clear contradictory and schizophrenic policies, because as you might know, many European national politics, economic policies, they found themselves caught in a real straitjacket. On the one side, they had to stick and abide a set of clear criterion, the Growth and Stability Pact, that was creating a lot of discipline in terms of also fiscal discipline. But on the other side, they lost completely their ability to develop a monetary policy which could have been independent and could have done justice to the economic realities of that particular country. This has been the situation for too long, and as the first question suggests, the economic crisis that started in 2008 certainly represented an important push for the European political leaders to somehow address this important gap and to, if you want, to fix the original sin by creating the conditions to finally laying down the premises for an incipient economic union. Today, the European Commission has been entrusted with the authority through the so-called European semester to supervise and monitor the budget of each individual member states. There are a lot of initiatives that were taken at that time. The European Banking Union represents the very last step that was reached by the political leaders, but there will certainly be more to come over the next few months. As you know, the implementation of the new banking union, which builds upon the previous steps, is still debated today. But overall, and this certainly address both the first and the second questions, the facts that occur over the last 2 years in Europe certainly represented an important acceleration in the economic integration of Europe, and seem to be quite promising if seen from a pro-integrationist perspective.
Yes, Alberto, do you think, for instance, that following the campaign, there will be possibly new answers and probably innovative answers to the economic crisis? If we go back to what the three main Spitzenkandidaten were proposing, we had youth, a mechanism to fight youth unemployment. We had a digital single market, or getting to give a new impetus to the single market, especially in the digital area. And also Juncker about minimum wage in the EU. We also see that the European Central Bank, the ECB, has just before the election been considering to have an influence on the level of the euro. So will this new commission and this new parliament be able to create and bring up new mechanisms beyond banking regulation and banking union, maybe to find a solution to this economic crisis crippling the EU?
This is a very timely question for the new European leadership. It is pretty clear that the way in which the economic policies in Europe are developed, especially now that they are oversighted, they are monitored by the European Commission, are creating a further straitjacket for the social welfare systems of many European countries. There is a clear case and a clear threat in reality that the European Union is posing to the social welfare system of those countries, to the point that the economic agendas of the left and the right parties are becoming so similar one to another, and the main responsibility for this coming together of the left and the right wing, it is very, very much related to the constraints imposed by the European Union. In these circumstances, it is pretty clear that only the European Union is and can be entitled to address those social challenges that the nation states today in Europe doesn't seem capable to do. There is therefore a clear case for more political initiatives. We have, so as Vincent pointed out, some initiatives taken up during the last few months address at employment and how to develop an employment scheme that favors mobility in Europe, thus completing the internal market for workers. But there is much more to be done, and we know that not only a European citizens initiative, but also some political parties, including Tsipras, for instance, is currently advocating, but also the Socialist Party, the Social Democrats, and Schulz mentioned several times the possibility to create minimum wage policy or some other forms of solidarity schemes at the European level. Of course, most of those initiatives, they do rely and they do start from the assumption that there could be a fiscal policy in Europe, because it will be needed in the medium-long run to have a common pot where these social schemes could be financed.
Okay, so thank you very much, and we've been also seeing now on the forum a couple of questions about voting rights and voting rules. So first in England, someone in the UK, someone was wondering if the electoral system had an impact on the results, and whether the UK was the only one not to have transferable votes, but to have a list system. And the answer is, in fact, it is a mandatory requirement that at the national level, the electoral system is meant in a proportionate way, proportional voting. That is, you have to not vote for one candidate, for a whole list. And then you can decide what constituency you want to have, whether a national constituency, a subnational regional constituency. France, for instance, would have been changing quite a few times from a national constituency to a local constituency, encompassing a number of regions. Of course, there are pros and cons for each system. When you take small constituencies, then you have a limited number of seats, and then only main parties will be able to be represented. Whereas in Germany, for instance, they have bigger ones, and also they don't have a threshold. It was judged unconstitutional by the German Constitutional Court to have a threshold, like a 5% or a 3% threshold, to get representation in the European Parliament. So a lot of parties were able to be represented in the European Parliament, and maybe you've seen that also an extreme right party making 1% is going to be for Germany in the European Parliament, but at the same time you see that the Liberal Democrats and the Pirates are also going to be able to be represented thanks to this very rule in Germany where you have no threshold for representation. And we have also a question for the voting rights of Italians abroad. So let's turn to, we have two Italians in the room now. We have Alberto and Ferdinando, but Ferdinando had an answer to that. So can you please elaborate and give us the question and the answer at the same time for your fellow Italians, Ferdinando?
Yes, thanks, Vincent. I want to reply to Ebeli Spain that posed me a question on YouTube. Saying that Italian citizens living abroad are not able to vote. But I am an Italian citizen living abroad, living in France, and I'm totally capable to vote. I'm voting for a European election, this European election, in my town, in my little town, my small town, and so the right to vote for the European election is a fully right that all the European citizen has. For instance, me, as an Italian, have the possibility to vote for Italian candidates, as I do, or as I did, or to vote for the French candidate if I am registered on the French register for the election. So this is, I think, this is a really good point, a point that shows us that Europe, the rights of vote, the fundamental rights of vote in Europe are assured to all citizens. So this is, I think, this is one of the not the European paradox, but the the force, the might, the European might that we have to disrupt, that we have to dismantle. And I think this is the might that Alberto told in the first week of our MOOC. So all the European citizens are able to vote in French, in Italy, or whatever. I don't know if Alberto has voted, for instance, in French or in Spain, but he has.
So Alberto, this is a personal question for you, whether you were able to vote and in what country maybe you did.
Any European citizen is entitled to vote when he's abroad. Is part of his European political rights, and not only to vote, also to run for elections. So both an active and a passive side of the vote exists and is protected. So I received two cards in my case, one in my residence, which is outside of Italy, which is my country of birth, and I could actually vote in my town of residence. What is interesting is that I also received another letter from my own city, where I was born in Italy, telling me that if I had to be in Italy on that date, since there were also municipal elections, I could have also voted there for the European Parliament. So there is a clear effort made by national authorities to make our life easier in Europe and to allow us to exercise our vote. However, there are also some possible abuses, and this is a little story anecdote that I would like to share with you. That a very famous journalist, who is actually the editor-in-chief of Die Zeit, which is the leading magazine, business magazine in Germany, this guy is of Italian descent. He therefore carries two passports, an Italian and a German one. And what happened to him, due to the fact that elections were not held in the very same day, he happened to be in Italy and in Germany during the elections, and he therefore decided to vote in both countries. This is a clear violation of the right to vote, which has already prompted the attention of the German authorities, who are currently prosecuting him for abusing of his political right.
Okay, thank you. And we are going to take one last questions now, and then this hangout will be over, linking these questions to immigration, both within the EU and from outside the EU. That was a huge debate as well with TTIP for these European elections. Maybe one of the most transnational debates we've seen. We've been witnessing debates about the European immigration policy in most of the countries voting these past few days. And Alban is going to tell us what participants in the forum on Twitter, on Facebook, and here on the Hangout on YouTube have been asking regarding immigration in Europe.
Thank you, Vincent.
Yeah.
Yes, as you said, there are a lot of very animated discussions, and particularly here on the Hangout. And a lot of those discussions, as you mentioned, were about the common policies and particularly about immigration and immigration policies. So, as you said, from the outside of the EU and within the EU. And a lot of people like Gavin, Sumit, Ilya, etc. Were asking why one did any common policy, why every country were doing things alone or were let alone, and should Europe be part of it and do something, or should a country be more organized? This is a very sensitive and delicate question, but I think this is important, and as you mentioned, a lot of people were concerned about it.
Thank you for your questions. I would have expected the current European elections to be and to offer an opportunity for discussing real subjects. And immigration, in my view, should have been the first subject to be debated in the European Union and during the electoral campaigns. Unfortunately, and this is absolutely regretful, this debate did not take place. Immigration has been used partly as a national theme by some of the anti-establishment movement, but also by some of the established political families in order to gain more votes. This is certainly not what we would need from the European Union. Immigration is certainly one of the areas where the European Union has been trying to do something useful in order to come up with a real policy establishing a legal framework for legal migration that is capable to find a balance between the economic need the European Union has to host immigrants and to actually receive them and make them European citizens, but also the expectations of many European citizens of safety. Immigration is perceived as a safety issue more than an economic issue, when in reality both aspects should be taken into account. The efforts made by the European Union over time are clearly insufficient in order to create the legal framework for legal migration that I mentioned. They are fragmented, they are not necessarily well implemented or implemented in a uniform way. And as we know well from the images we receive from the media on a weekly basis, the problem, between brackets, or the challenge of immigration, it is not faced by all the European countries in the same way. And unfortunately, there has been a failure of the European Union to adopt a policy aimed at curbing irregular migration and to developing a policy which remains credible. Too often we hear that immigration becomes only a problem when some accidents and some crises occur. I would expect the European Union and possibly the new European political leadership to be more serious about it. The current Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, was certainly in good faith in pushing for such an agenda. But as we know well, and we have learned in this course, the European Commission alone cannot make miracles when the political will by the Council and the European Parliament is not there, it is not met. So there's a lot of wishful thinking on my side that immigration might be one of the new privileged area of intervention of the next European Commission and possibly European Parliament and Council. So for the new legislator, there's a lot of work to be done. Immigration, an immigration policy is not a panacea that can address all the consequences stemming from important flow of people, but there's a clear economic case for developing a more structured approach that is capable to do justice to the need to have a real, serious immigration policy that looks not only at high-skilled workers, but also low-skilled workers, and promoting family reunification and long-term residence.
Thanks a lot, Alberto. And before letting you conclude on this, I would like to thank all of you who participated in the forums on this Hangout, on Twitter, on Facebook, especially from Coursera Forum Seoul, Victor Ogurtkov, Elena Davidkovska, Ernest Tan, Rebecca Kemp, and also our other teaching assistants who have been helping us building these Hangouts today, and were not able to make it live, but Lilian Lau, Martin Brennecke, and Arjan Tupan, as well as the two very useful and excellent community TAs here today with us, Ferdinando Orlando and Alban Colin, who were giving to Alberto the questions you have been asking. And sorry if we didn't get your questions. Also thanks to Zvitka and to Zvika Greenberg and to Vanessa Klein from HEC Paris, who's behind everything in these MOOCs by HEC. So Alberto, here's the last words to you now.
Yes, it has been a pleasure to meet you today, to spend some time. I hope it has been a fruitful meeting. I really look forward to meeting you again in the near future. There are still some videos, some classes, some quizzes, some essays. We will try to keep you updated on what is going on with our weekly messages, possibly some videos as well that we'll be recording in the next weeks. I wish you all the best with our course. Keep your critical perspective on what everything is going on in Europe. Our objective in this course is not to make you or turn your mind into a European mindset, is to make you understand Europe. That's what we care the most, and hopefully we're going to be able to achieve this objective by the end of the MOOC. Once more, thanks a million also to Vincent, Ferdinando, and Alban for assisting us, and for Vanessa Klein, who is our project manager at HEC. Good luck to each of you, and see you soon. Bye-bye.